Hey everybody, we're going to jump into color matching. Now, this is a highly controversial subject, and the fact that some people will look at what I'm showing and say, that's all wrong. That's fine. Everybody has their different ways of doing things. What I did was humbly approach some of the professionals and speaking off camera, and again, these professionals will remain anonymous, but they gave me a lot of their time, which was great because they're very busy, and going over what is the best, most robust way of doing color correction in context of working in production, because it's a little different when you're just kind of throwing a bunch of color correction nodes or something to make it work, versus the understanding that there will be changes in the future from art director, or the director might want to change, or there might be what is sort of like a look development, where whatever look development you do on a creature's lighting or something inside of Nuke, those exposure changes and so forth need to be implemented back into CG, so the CG re-renders all the shots with the monster and brings them back into comp, and then you don't have a million color nodes, color correct nodes to make the adjustments. And you need to be able to have something that can go back, so when you get into like S-curvy and using ranges and color correct nodes, that's a little iffy if you're trying to be able to dial that back into the lights inside of Maya or whatever program you're using. So again, this is, I'm going to take no credit for any of this in regards to the techniques and so forth. These are all from other people, but I'm just kind of showing a collection and trying to establish a very good template for production. So again, everybody has their preferences, but this is just ones that I would say probably would work the best for you. So again, leave comments below if you feel otherwise. So this is a shot of Evan. We're going to go over this shot in a future episode, where we're going to basically go into color correcting interactive lighting, and also color correcting interactive lighting with areas that don't have interactive lighting. So we're going to put like a tattoo on his face. So here's a gradient horizontal, which you can get off of Nuke Survival Toolkit. And we're going with the basic grade node, which you're going to do a lot of your color correction workflows in. So by default, you have black point, white point, and then of course lift, gain, multiply, offset, and gamma. The math that's happening here goes to this node, goes to this node, then goes to this node, and so on and so forth. So the black point, if you guys don't already know, is you set what's black. So in this case, we have numbers from 0 all the way to 1. So if I come in here and dab this and hold down Control and Alt and click a specific area, you'll see it now has redefined. If I go turn off the dabber, this whole area is now 0. And that's because I have black clamp on. So anything below 0 is going to be clamped. Okay, so it goes to 0, and then we go back in the information. Now, I can do the same for defining what the white point is by hitting the dabber, holding down Control and Alt on a PC, and defining what is white. So then everything after this, okay, will be above 1. If I turn on white clamp, you'll see that if I turn off my dabber here, the values are basically 1, then it goes to the gradient, and then it goes to 0. So there is now contrast here in the scene, technically. So with that said, the only issue with this is the fact that, again, we're going to talk about how using the technique of setting your black point and white point on your CG and setting your lift and your gain from your background plate can cause problems. And so if I just turn off black clamp and white clamp and take a look, you'll see that the curve continues. So the curve is actually continuous. So here's the plot point here, if we go ahead and take a look at it. The curve is actually, it just keeps going down to negative values. Up here it's actually going up as well. So I can prove that to you by just scanning across. You can see now we're at values of 2. These are called super whites, and then below here is sub-blacks, values below 0. So you can see the negative values that are happening here. And this is one of the things that's not good about using the black point, white point technique we'll talk about later. So anyway, the next thing is obviously the lift. So if I go ahead, I'll just set these back to default again, and then we'll take a look at the lift. And the lift, as you can see, lifts up the black point, sort of like an inverted multiplication, but the pivot point here is at this 1 to 1. And because of that, any values above 1 are actually being, the exposure's going, actually being brought low, okay? So as we're sort of lifting this up, this line keeps going, and any exposure that's out here in our raw footage is actually being lowered. So Not the greatest way to set the blacks, but it is an option. The gain is a multiplication process that's obviously used for exposure, mostly changing the highlights. And it's the same thing also in multiply. So commonly people use gain for the exposure adjustment, and then multiplication is sort of the use for color, so individual color changes. So if you have a bluish tinge in your highlights, you'll do that in the multiply. The offset obviously is a subtraction addition process. So you can see what's happening here. We're just adding more values, subtracting values. And then we have the gamma, which basically consists of building up your contrast. Now, I've talked to a lot of compositors, and as much as you probably will be using contrast, the gamma, to make adjustments in contrast to match, getting into these sort of logarithmic curve workflows and S-curve realities, especially in the color correct node ranges, which is usually not a good idea, it can create issues in regards to doing certain color corrections of different ranges and so forth, because you're getting into a logarithmic curve where things can easily drop off and then all types of fun can occur. Alright, so moving on, these are things, we're going to talk about matching your black point. The black point is the tool you put on at the very end after you do all your grading, and it sort of acts like a governor so that your darkest dark never goes darker than the plate shot's darkest dark. So commonly people will use a toe. And in this case, we'll go ahead and just show you that. So here is our actual curve. And I'll just take the toe, which is this information here, and bring the luminance down. It's set to 0.17, so right there and any higher. And if I go ahead and just kind of adjust this curve, you'll see what it's doing. It's not touching the midtones that much, as the lift actually would start to touch the midtones in regards to setting your blacks. But you can see it kind of creates this kind of like hook curve here. And again, if you want to know anything more about this, you can just do a lot of studies on it. You'll find it. There's a lot of information. So it's a different way that the curve is kind of being increased. And again, I'll just put that back to 117. Now let's talk about the high pot method. So I learned this working over at a studio in Chicago. So when you get to all your color correction work, the last thing on your color correction is this merge node set to high pot. And then you would just sample in the constant, as you would sample in the toe, or make adjustments manually, the actual darkest dark in your plate shot. So you would take this and you would click here, you would sample, like we would sample in the CG environment that we had Sam Jackson covered in. We would actually sample the darkest dark of the CG environment to match the green screen, to match his green screen. So and in this you do the high pot. So if I put this plot line here, you can see the constant color is at the same example we did for the toe, which is 0.17. So if you want to see the kind of difference of this, you can see that the high pot actually is more narrow. It doesn't go as close to the midtones as, say, the toe does. So you can see the toe has more reach as far as influencing this. And again, in all of these examples, if I were to come in here and add a grade node and start to gain this down, you'll see that it's never going to go any lower than your black point, which is what you want. Okay, so you can see if I take the gamma and start cranking that down, it's like a governor. It's not going any lower than that. Alright, so we go ahead and delete this and keep moving. Now the preferred method for setting your blacks has been blacks match, just because of its the ability to use to get the manipulation of the toe or high pot all in one deal. So you can see that if I come in here and do the plot of the horizontal line, we have the option in here to choose either high pot or plus screen, and we can play with the mid-low range and the gamma. So you can do, there's so much control you have for this little area right here as far as the influence and the fall off of the actual values. And again, here's where you would sample, or you would manually go in and set your black point. So here I can go and kind of bring that down a little bit, and you can just see you can get every imaginable curve sort of fall off that you'd ever want. Okay, so it's these are just examples going through. The common phrase, again, this might tick somebody off, but avoid the black and white left gain sampling for match. This can create clamping and banding. So again, to give an example, simple example here, we have this horizontal reality, right? And here I've sampled, let's go ahead and let's set this back to defaults. I'm going to set this back to defaults. And let's just pretend we go and pretend this is the CG object or something. We'll set the blacks, we'll set the whites, and then I'll sample the background plate, something like that, okay. And the only problem with this reality, even with black clamp on or off, is that the values, if we take a look at them, the values are 0 if clamped, and if they're unclamped, they're negative values. So I talked about before how the curve goes down. So any of the details between this value and this value have been clamped or are in a negative reality, so we've sort of lost that information there. So if we do any color correction work here, we might get banding if we try to stretch this information out, because all that information has been lost, and all of a sudden we go from black to this quick fall off. So instead of doing all of that, the classic way of working here is simply going in and setting up your luminance and then setting up your contrast first off. So we'll be, in this case, you can see if I go ahead and disable and re-enable, this is adding contrast, which is upping your gain. I'll go ahead and disable and re-enable here. You can up the gain and you could lower the gamma. So now you have more contrast this way. And then you'll set your blacks eventually later on with this blacks match. Okay. So again, pretty simple. We're going to get into a series of examples. You can adjust contrast without changing the saturation change as well. It's important to understand that as you do any type of workflow here, you'll see that the saturation, if we come in here and take the gain, and we'll bring the contrast up or whatever. Actually, bring contrast down. Let's do something like that. And you'll start to see how, as we make these changes, let's go ahead and create some contrast here. Kind of actually go down. Yeah, so there's the saturation kind of kicking in there. So you can see as we make adjustments to gamma, saturation changes. Okay, increase contrast, increased saturation will occur. Well, what if you want to increase contrast but not really have too much of the saturation change? Well, you can come in here and do a simple workflow, which is take your, in this case I was using a black and white image, where we convert the color space from linear to HSV, do the color grade on just the blue channel, and then the color space is brought back to HSV to linear. Now obviously in the color space conversion to HSV, the red channel is empty, the green channel is empty, and the blue channel has luminance, because in a black and white image there is no hue and there is no saturation. But in a color image, which we have here, I'll find a saturated frame here with Evan. See if I can get, there we go. Is when I do the conversion over, you can see we have the red channel with the hue, kind of grainy. Green channel is the saturation level, so it's highly saturated on his face, as you can see in the original footage. And then in blue is the luminance. So this allows me to adjust luminance without changing saturation or hue. So if we go ahead and take a look, go ahead and set this back. I've graded this to add contrast, and we're only grading the blue channel, by the way. So really what we're doing here is we go to the blue channel. This is what we're changing. And if we take a look at the difference now, you'll see that even though saturation is changing a little bit, it's not really changing that much when we play with gamma here. It's a little bit, it is changing a little bit, but it's not as dramatic as it was before as far as the saturation levels. Another thing you can't do is use color correction nodes. Even though Nuke has this thing called color correction, the fact is you have many ranges. Now there's two things bad about this. This introduces a lot of S-curvy type stuff in the actual, say if we could show examples on the plot scan line, but the other thing is these color correction nodes, they work under ranges. So if I do any adjustments to the midtones, I go to the midtones and make the adjustments here. It's only affecting this range right here. My ranges, it's affecting this range right here, which I can also alter if I want. So I can come in here and make adjustments. So it's now any values between 0.2 and 0.8 are going to get affected. You can get a lot of breaking of color correction that way for these color corrections that happen under really swift and fast color corrections. And also the daisy chain effect, or the ripple effect, so to speak, that if you make any change here, if the director or art director says get rid of that color correction node, you've actually changed the range because it's feeding off this previous node. So you're changing things, and that's changing what you've defined as the range of influence. So it's not really a good idea to do that. Okay. And then what you end up getting is a lot of crazy, goofy curve stuff, which for you to interpolate this back from look development back to CG would be very hard for them to understand how to color correct it to match up the approved footage from your boss. So instead, the idea is to take to key the information, the range you want to color correct from the original plate, so that it's independent of any progressive color correction. So in this case, if we wanted to hit up the highlights or something, I'll take a luma keyer. You can use a regular keyer if you want. I'm only hitting up the highlight areas, plugging that into a mask, and now that's happening there. And this can be taken out of the mix, and although it does have a progressive, whatever happens here will get affected here, this will never change. What we actually decide what we're going to key is never going to change. Okay, so this is the best workflow. So again, you can choose, try to get the shadow areas or something or whatever. So anyway, with that said, you can see right here, if we work under this sort of workflow, we're kind of avoiding all those range curves, and you end up getting a more cleaner result in regards to the curve itself, which again could be reverse engineered into the look development. So matching CG, I have a really horribly tracked Easter egg here, and I have a background. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at these. So here's Evan. Here's this Easter egg thingy. Okay, all it is this gradient and so forth. And we have set up the usual 3 things to sort of tech check if it's setting in the plate. One is a saturation node. Some set it to 6 or 8. You can go whatever you want, somewhere in that range. And then I have a grade node with gain down. And then I have a gain that's about somewhere around 3.5 or 4. Okay, this allows us to see the shadows, see the highlights, the intensities and so forth, and the saturation levels, as you can see here. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and we're obviously, because this is a alpha object, we're going to have to unpremult the egg, and then we'll have to premult it. So what I'm about to show you is, I believe to be, you could chastise me if you want, a pretty good robust startup. Okay, so we got to match this as best we can. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll add a grade node. So I'll add a grade node, and this is we're going to deal with the luminance, so to speak, and also the contrast. So we can kind of see if we hit the letter Y that this thing is already just too bright in general. I'm not talking about color just yet. But I can take the gain here, and this will be my exposure, and start to see that settle in and sort of set back into the plate itself. So does it look like it's popping, sticking out, or is it actually in the scene? So in a way, you can kind of look at the luminance values around here, how dark this is in the back of the scene, and you can kind of match it from there. Okay, so then how about contrast? So if I kind of take a look here, the contrast isn't too bad, but if I kind of play around a little bit with the contrast adjustments, the slamming the gamma, so to speak, you'll start to see whether or not this starts to pull itself away from the matte. So in this case, I might want to just take my gamma, and I can bring it up, or I can bring it down. It's hard to say. I'd say maybe bring it down a little bit. All right, so let's take a look how that looks. Pretty simple. It's highly saturated, by the way, so just be aware of that. All right, so we can jump ahead and create a blacks match to get the blacks taken care of for now. So I'll do a blacks match like that, stick that in there, and we're going to go ahead and in this case, we're going to jump into our saturation node. So we can see in this area, I'm going to try to grab the shadows of this area here. So you can do it. You could either do it one way or the other. You can click on this little dabber here, hold down Control and Shift, and like sample that area. Obviously, you know, we can see that, you know, we might want to grab, you know, a series of areas there. That's pretty intense. In fact, I might bring my saturation down a few because that's maybe a little too much. Maybe something like 5 for my double checking here. So you can see the change, and at this moment in time you kind of go, well, that's maybe a little bit too intense. So let's go ahead and take a look at the shot itself without all the saturation going on. So that's a little bit too much. So this is where I could go in, go to my saturation node, and I could start kind of playing with the blacks match. And everything you do is usually using temperature, magenta, intensity, according to the experts. So I'm going to hold down Control and click this little color wheel. And we really want to avoid red, green, blue, because you can see, you know, if I make any adjustments here, things are either be warmed up or magenta or green are being added. If I adjust the intensity, you can see the red, green, and blue, they alter differently as this increase occurs. So it's best to either stick with this and this. So again, I'm going to bring this back to where we were at, which I think was down here, and then I'm going to start to dial in the shadow area here. So probably see if we can kind of get that brownish spiel going there. And I could bring this intensity down and let that kind of settle in there a little bit. And again, this is looking at it in a very extreme reality. If I go ahead and just come back to the original plate, maybe brighten this up a little bit, you can see it's still pretty red. So I might have to come in here and start to see, maybe I got to pull it away from purple a little bit. There we go. And then again, I'm using temperature and magenta. I'm not jumping into you know, red, green, blue, and adjusting RGB. You could go into the individual channels, RGB, you know, like that if you wish. Okay, so let's kind of go ahead and take a look at this. So, you know, you might have an issue where you might want to adjust saturation. So you could put a saturation node in here, you know, and again, it doesn't matter what happens here. That color, whatever we set for blacks match, will overwrite everything above here. So don't worry if you're like, oh, you know. So maybe I'll bring the saturation down just a hair like that. I still want to retain a little bit of that purpliness, so to speak. Okay, so again, the highlights is another thing. The highlights, in this case, we might have went a little bit overboard with taking out the contrast here, so maybe I'll bring a little bit of that back. And then for highlights, we could go with this sort of color over here. So I'll take the grade, and under multiply is where we're going to actually choose the channel. So again, I'll hold down and go into our 4 channels here. Hold down Control, and again, I'm working with temperature, magenta, intensity. This is very orangey / browny, so bring this, kind of bring that in. I'm not really seeing much of an influence here. So I might want to jump over to my I might actually want to bring down my, we got my gamma a little bit. There we go. And let's see if we, yeah, it's like there's really not much going on there. I could go into my saturation node down here just to see the colors, and jump back into here and start to adjust this the best I can. I don't have much to work off of in this circumstance, but you know, you're also fighting against, you don't want to make this thing completely brown to match the background, because it inherently has it's like a purple or blue egg or whatever it is, you know. Again, these are subtleties that you can slam your gamma to when you get to your original footage here. Start doing stuff like this and see like, oh, is it too bright? And again, we'll go back to our brightness and our contrast. So you can see this here is for us to see the highlights. So is the highlight that the kind of like the brightest bright here matching with this? And I would say maybe we need to bring, it could be something as, because it's pretty dark back. There's not a lot of contrast. I can darken that up a little bit. And then over here is the brightest bright, which we can take this and bring it up even more. You can kind of like crank that baby up. And you're looking at the shadow areas in this case now. So you can see we got that brownish shadow area. And again, I could also kind of judge maybe a little bit on the exposure side here. So I'll come back over here and bring the gain down. Something like that. Again, you want to see if it separates itself. So if I go back to the merge node, you can see I'm kind of bringing this back and forth. And it feels like it's settling in. It doesn't feel like it pops out when we do this. See that? And even at this level, I might need to introduce a little bit more coloring in the background plate. But that's a pretty simple match just to the background, not to the interactive lighting that's happening in the foreground. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the before and after on this. Disable and re-enable, like a huge difference there. But again, it's pretty dark and it's lost a little bit of its bluish tinge here. It was a pretty bright object in the beginning anyway. So again, if you want it to pop out a little bit more, you can come back here. If you want it to really stick out a little bit, where you could add some gain to it. Again, that's the exposure. So there's a couple of examples here I have for you guys to play with. So we're going to go ahead and just try some of these out. This is raw information, so if I do any color correction on Evan on his little counterpart here, anything that's going up and down is the CG element. I already prepped the scene with an unpre-mult grade and so forth. So again, we go through the same process in practice. So in this case, we have this loft scene. We need to color correct this. And here we have two elements that we need to correct to match this plane that I was out flying with my friend Tyler. And then over here is, this is really the lighting. You can use this for reference, but you want to match the lighting the best you can in this situation. And again, in certain situations, you have to see like the light's coming from the opposite side of Tyler. This is an important fact that obviously when you light in CG, you want to make sure the light's coming in the right direction, and it's going to be hard, but it is a challenge. It's worth trying. I have this one called Ugly Match, which is in the plane that's badly color corrected. And then I have this one right here, which is Evan sitting at a restaurant. So you're going to try to take this element and match it to the original. And I also have this final one, which is Evan in the mountains. So you can see there's smoke and atmospherics that will change up the black point and so forth. So again, just good exercise. So you are basically going to be color correcting in these areas, and it's just good practice. That seems to be the best way to do this. So for instance, if I come in here, and let's go to the Loft machine. This is where we're getting a little bit more contrast here. So I can start with the grade node. Oops, put my viewer to that. And again, I'm going to just start with luminance, right? So I will take the gain and start to bring that down to match up with what I see here with Evan. And then maybe adjust the gamma a little bit. So let's go ahead and just bring this down. Maybe gamma him up. Okay, he's got a pretty heavy highlight on that side versus here where the light fall off, but this would make sense actually as far as the distance of the fall off of the light. So you can see just by that color correction information alone, we're starting to get into the ballpark there. He's feeling a little bit like he's there. Okay, so the next process obviously is again just copy pasting this wonderful little tool set, throwing it at the bottom here. And we can go ahead and just take a look. So we have saturation, and again, you can come in here, you can adjust the gamma and say, okay, is he falling out of the picture? It seems like when I pull the gamma up, he's losing some contrast information. So I might have to go back to my grade node and take the contrast and play around with it a little bit so it doesn't lose a ton of contrast. Okay, so you can kind of use the Y value if you wish. Okay, let's go ahead and see how that looks. I'll pull this back. So that's looking. That looks pretty good. So we can come in here now and start to adjust, say, the highlights. So if I go to the multiply, I'll go to my saturation. You can see that it's very, very reddish in his face, very orangish here. So again, I'm going to go to the gain, and of course, what's the opposite of orange? We're going to go with bluish. That's going to pull it more towards that, and see if we can get more purplish color to match up with that to that. And again, you want to just double check and go back to your merge node. You can see the color correction has matched that as best as it can. And then we can go in and set the blacks. So I'll do a blacks match from Mr. Tony Lyons, throw that in. Yeesh. So again, I can come in here and take a look at the darkest dark here and see if we can find, yeah, so it's pretty dark here. So I can sample if I want to. I can come over here and sample like this area right here or whatever, and we can disable and re-enable, see if we're getting, and I forgot about this, I gotta hit sample there we go. Whoa, okay, so that kind of gives us a rough start. Okay, and we can kind of come in here if we wish and adjust this by holding down control and adjusting temperature, magenta, intensity. So I could probably like brighten this up and just kind of take a look at the darkest dark. And again, it's just you playing around basically, so you can come in here and just adjust it. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, obviously, but you're getting this general practice in. All right. I still feel like he's a little bit too dark, so again, I'll come back to the grade node. Go to the, in this case, I use the gain, but I'll do multiply, either or, like that, and maybe, it's going to be kind of tricky to get him in there. So anyway, and then, like I said, you might want to give a little bit more coolness there to the highlight. So I'll go to the gain again and start to punch in maybe it's not too much. There we go. Alright, so let's see the difference of what we had before and after. There's the before, there's the after. So again, you be the judge on that one. You can get in there and play around. So again, I can go ahead and disconnect this and make our way down the chain to even more difficult situations. So let's take a look at this one. Now this one is obviously a little bit darker. It doesn't have as much contrast in a certain realm. You always have to look at things in depth too. Just because atmospherics are in the background doesn't mean your black point is this. Your black point, obviously, because we're so close to camera and there's no atmosphere between you and the actor, is right here. So again, I'll go ahead and just take a look. I'll take my grade node. Again, I'm just going to turn on my intensity here. Y, and start to dial this down till it sort of sits in the scene. It's rather dark. They're almost like in silhouette. So realize that. And then at this point, we might want to take a look at the, start slamming the gamma here, and just seeing if we need to adjust the gamma, which I would say yes. So I could take the gamma and maybe add a little bit of that in there. Let's see what we got. There we go. So there's the before and the after. Huge difference, obviously. And then I could add my blacks match like this. And I will go ahead and sample maybe this area right here. And I can come in. And I could also adjust my multi-low range and so forth if I feel that it's a little bit too much influence on there. And again, I could hold down control, get in here, and just kind of look at this from the point of the saturation node and bring up this and see, like, okay, let's take a look at those shadow areas. This is a little bit brown. It's actually not too bad. It's actually matching pretty good, but maybe I need to add a little bit more purple in there. Whoa, you got to be very careful with this. So actually, I don't think I sampled at all. I keep doing that. Sorry, guys. There we go. That's pretty crazy. I'll go back and seems like we're getting a little bit nutty, but that's okay. So in this case, obviously, these are pretty high values. So I can start to bring this down. And I could start to introduce, I don't have to always sample something. So I could just dial it in. Most people will just dial it in. So I'll put my viewer to that. Bring up the exposure a little bit. So you can see it's doing a decent job of matching. And then the highlights, there's not much going on with the highlights, but I wouldn't say it's that warm. So again, I can come into my grade node, go into my multiply, open her up, and start adding whatever I feel like. Maybe I need to add some magenta into the shot. Like that. It's kind of good to have only like 2 real variables here to kind of fight with, you know. Still got this top of his head that's pretty warm. If I go too crazy here, you know. And again, maybe there's something, this is a situation where you can come in here and hit a grade node, use a keyer or something. We'll use a classic keyer just so you can see the fall off isn't the greatest, but I will take the CG of Evan, and maybe I want to isolate that hair up there, so I'll go ahead and hit A, go to the luminance, and let's try to get just that patch of hair up there. You know, you could basically do it based on hue too if you wish, you know. But I'm basically trying to get, and you want to have a decent fall off here so you don't get no weird artifacts. And you can mask this as well. It's no biggie, and so forth. So you can add a mask to this, and then I'll go ahead and take this newest grade and plug in the mask to that. And then we can come in here and start adjusting this. So if I feel that I need to introduce, even maybe, this might be taboo, but you can go into gamma and maybe introduce a little bit of, you know, a little purple in there or something. I don't know. It's me goofing around here. So you can see the match looks pretty good compared to what we had before. It's starting to match in there pretty good. And then I'll let you guys exercise the rest of these, obviously. I think I want to jump ahead, though, just to the atmosphere fog. So I'll go ahead and disable this. You can make this a little tool set if you wish. So these are all ones you can practice on. And we'll go to this scene right here, which is Evan out here. So let's go ahead and try to get some of these guys independently here. So in this case, again, I can hit the letter Y, and the contrast is vastly different here with what you see with Evan. So it's being included by a little bit of atmospherics. So if I come in here and take this grade node, I can start adjusting obviously the gain again. Oops, wrong Evan. Wrong Evan. Let's go to this guy. I think this is him. There he is. Okay, so we'll take that grade and start to bring him. Looks like maybe bring him up. Let's take this gamma. So you can see we're starting to match him in there as best we can. So I'll go back to red, green, and blue so you can see what's happening there. It's getting, and you see it pushes too much, it's too much contrast. I bring it down, and then I play with the gamma a little bit here. And we still haven't really set in his blacks yet, so let's go ahead and do that. We'll do a blacks match. You could also do a toe. I mean, we might as well just do a toe just to show you the other options here. So I can take the toe, and we could start to I'll do this manually here, bring up the intensity here. You can see we're starting to bring that in. And then the highlight information, you know, as far as the saturation, we're getting this kind of like purple-esque spiel going on. So again, I'll go to this grade, I'll use gain this time. They're both the same thing. Gain and multiply are the same multiplication process. So I can come in here and maybe dial down the, you know, kind of move towards magenta, move away from, let's see here, and he might be just saturation in general might be an issue. So again, you could come over here and add saturation, dial that down a little bit. like that. Okay, so now if we go back to our original comp, you'll see that's a little bit overboard, obviously, because we want to have color, you know. So again, to each his own in regards to matching. So again, you can come in here, you can see the highlights might be a little bit too much. This is where we play again with our two little options here. It's not looking too bad. It's a little bit overboard. Mix this in a little bit. Yeah, it's, again, I would probably maybe go into my toe and up that a little bit. And it might need a little bit of purple-esque in there. Again, I could find that out by going to the saturation node here and going to my grade and going like, it looks like a general like pinkish color. It's not doing too bad. So jump in here and seems like it's just way, I don't know what it is, but it's just like, looks like it's more of the like the gamma itself is a possibility in here. So anyway, let's go ahead and just take a look at it from the pure viewing method here. You can see we bring it down, bring it up. You can kind of sit there and go, oh, that highlight's a little too strong, you know, for what we're dealing with. So again, it depends on how close they are to the camera. So, you know, just slam your gamma, do all these fun things, and you'll eventually get a pretty nice color match. So anyway, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed the demonstration, and in the future demos we'll do interactive lighting, and you can download this and all these files should line up pretty well. You don't have to reference them in. They'll be based on the root structure of where the file's at, and you can just color correct all these other goodies and just play with matching and get some practice in. The last thing I wanted to talk about was just one last thing I want to mention is you're going to be using exposure nodes or any color correction or art direction given by your boss that says, hey, we need you to make an adjustment on blah, 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 blah. You're probably going to use an exposure node to make an exposure change in the form of f-stops. So instead of working under the regular workflow, adjust this to f-stops. So if we bring this up one, it's one f-stop or half the light, twice the light, stuff like that. So if I come over here and I find that after all the color correction, I have my toe, right? Let's go back to this comp. If the boss is like, hey, make the furthest Evan back there a little brighter. So you can see we could just have this and make it brighter or darker. And then if the director says, you know what, that doesn't really work out, you can always take this out. But a beauty of keeping yourself away from too many S-curves or stuff, you know, or ranges, is you can reverse engineer this. I could say, okay, tell the person in CG, you have to make it one stop under. So they'll take the lights in their CG environment, bring it up one stop brighter, then you delete this, the CG comes in again, and then you recomp it and so forth. So any adjustments are here that you can take them out, or remember the boss said, you know, add them and take them out as the changes that the client makes, or if your boss makes, will basically be told.